Hello, my name is Sarah Wilson, and today I'm going to be talking to you about copyright. So, today we'll be talking about copyright. What is it, and how do I avoid it? I know for some of you this isn't going to be new information, but for some it is new information, and if it's not new, it's always a good reminder to have. As you begin working on your research, it's important to know about copyright and how to avoid it. Let's start with why you should avoid breaking copyright. Quite simply put, there are legal ramifications to breaking copyright. Why? Well, copyright is when someone is given the legal rights to their creative work. In other words, it's when someone's creative property is something that they own. This can include anything from pictures, videos, writing, infographics, graphs, and charts. For instance, it could be a picture that you search on the internet. Whenever you type in dog and you come up with all these dog photos, then some of those photos are probably copyrighted. It could be a video whenever you're watching PewDiePie videos, right? Those are all copyrighted because they belong to the owner who created those videos. When you use something that someone has the copyright to without asking permission, you are stealing from them. And really, you're stealing money from them as well. Why? Because if you use something without their permission, you're stealing. These creations are how people are making their money. So these people are putting their writing, their videos, their music, their pictures, whatever it is that they have created out there for people to use, yes, but they're for people to use at a cost. So how can you find things which are not under copyright? Most copyrighted items will have this symbol, the C inside of the circle. But technically, everything is copyrighted, whether it has the symbol or not. So you should always assume that something is copyrighted and not okay for redistribution before using it in a presentation or a paper. While there are sources out there that aren't copyrighted, and we'll talk about those in a minute, it's always best to assume that otherwise it is copyrighted because you don't want to be stealing from somebody, even if it's just on accident and you have the best intentions. But then how could you ever use sources if almost everything is technically copyrighted? When something is copyrighted, the creator decides how the information is to be distributed. Plus, there are fair use laws to help with education-specific needs. Sometimes the creator will decide things are made free as public domain, and sometimes they decide that you have to pay. But it's all up to the creator and what they are doing. Fair use. Fair use allows small portions of work which have been copyrighted to be used for educational purposes. For example, this could be a paper. Like you could use these sources to put into a paper. It could be used for a lesson given by a teacher. It could be used for presentations. Fair use is judged by 4 different things: the purpose of use, the nature of work, the amount used, and the effect it has on the market. So let's break this down. The purpose of use. What are you using this for? What are you using the copyrighted material for? Generally speaking, if you're using it for your latest hit, YouTube or TikTok video, it's not going to be allowed. But for educational purposes, it usually is. So things that are usually not okay for businesses might be okay for educational purposes. That is, as long as you are not copying and pasting without giving credit to the source, and as long as you are not copying and pasting the entire work. So you don't want to just pull an image from the internet and use it. You're going to have to cite where you got that image from and make sure that it does come from somewhere that it is an image that will be allowed to be used. You also need to make sure that it's not, even if you Never mind. Okay, so the nature of the work, who is it written for, and what is its original purpose? The nature of the work just means who's going to be using it. What is the intended target audience? Most articles or books, especially those from the school databases, will probably be considered as fair use for education. So what might be considered for fair use? Portions of articles from databases or works written for educational purposes. Because these works are in the databases are usually curated for schools. So these databases can include images, videos, and music. However, those things may not always be seen as intended for educational purposes. For instance, Disney is very intense about their copyright rules, and they don't usually sell rights to clips even from their movies for teachers to use because it's not for educational purposes. The idea behind it was not for educational purposes. So you need to look for documents whose original purpose is for education. The more educational, the more likely it will be considered fair use. Also, and I know that I'm starting to sound like a broken record, you have to give credit to the source. You always, always, always have to give credit to the source. The amount you use of something is also important. You can't use the whole thing. Otherwise, how would that be your own work? Aim for 10% or less. So I remember way back in the day when my computer science teacher taught us about copyright rules. She always said 10% or less. For fair use, you don't want to use the whole thing. If you did, then the work wouldn't be yours. But it can be considered fair use if you use a small portion of the source you want to cite. For instance, I can't just copy and paste an entire article, but I can potentially quote a paragraph or a sentence from the article to further support my thesis. In fact, I have personally done this on several occasions. When writing a paper, it is important to document and show your sources. One of the ways to do this is by directly quoting those articles, books, documents, etc. that you found to support your thesis. But you remember, you can't just quote the entire thing. You can also show a segment of a video, but you need to make sure that it's not against their copyright policy, that the video is for educational purposes, and that you're using less than 10% of that video, unless it's otherwise specified that it's free domain. The biggest one, though, is the effect it has on the market. How much money will someone lose from you using their work? Have you ever noticed how your teachers have a whole bookcase full of textbooks that you might not ever use? That's because of copyright and the effect it has on the market. So what does that mean? Think about your English classes. How many of you have a class set of books or one book for each student so that you can read on your own? I'm willing to bet that the answer is everyone. Why is that? Why didn't your teacher just buy one book and make 150 copies of each chapter for their students? That would be cheaper, right? It's the same reason why you have all those textbooks sitting there. While the lessons can be used from the textbooks, you still have to have a one-to-one ratio of book to student classroom set in order for it to be in copyright. Why? Well, to begin, it would be super time consuming for your teacher to have to copy all those things. But more importantly, the author of that book would lose out on 150 books worth of royalties. And that's how that person makes their living. The effect on the market means how much money is the company, author, artist, or creator going to lose if you use their work for your own purposes. Think of it this way. You can go on Etsy and buy a print to hang in your room for $1.50. So the artist would make $1.50 every time someone uses that picture, right? But what happens if you make a copy of that picture for your friend? It's just $1.50. That's harmless, right? But what if your friend makes a copy and someone else's friend makes a copy? And now there are 100 copies out there that have not been paid for. Now that artist has lost $150. Now think about that as far as book sales. If the book you are reading in class costs $12 per copy, times 150 students, the author and the publisher lost $1,800, and that's a lot of money. Think about all the things you could buy with $1,800. Thus, when thinking about copyright, you need to be aware of how your use will change the market and affect others. There are, however, items in the public domain. This means free for use for anyone. It could mean that the copyright has expired, the creator has offered it to public domain, or the creator didn't renew the copyright. The public domain is a great place to find free things. For instance, did you know that all of Shakespeare's works are considered public domain? His works are old enough now that no one owns a copyright on them, and they can be used by anyone. That doesn't mean you don't have to cite your source, though. You still have to give credit to the person who originally created the work. So why do we avoid copyright? Because we have integrity, or in other words, doing the right thing when no one is looking. Sure, for a school project, your teacher might not check the copyright on every image every time, but it's about doing the right thing, and the second big one, not stealing from someone. Remember that these are someone's products that they are selling. You wouldn't steal a book from a store or a painting from an art gallery, so don't just take words and images off the internet. So let's rewind and remember. Copyright is the legal rights given to a creator, and fair use policies are the purpose of work or what it's intended for, the nature of the work, the amount that you use, and the effect it has on the market.